Alara had just fallen asleep on my chest when my phone buzzed on the side table. I shifted slightly, careful not to wake her. The screen lit up with a message from Mom. I expected something bland and performative, maybe a reminder about the formula or a link to some European parenting article she thought I should consider. But instead, it was 6 words that split my world in two. "We're moving to Barcelona." I emptied the account. Good luck. I didn't move. Not for a full minute. My body went numb before my brain caught up. I opened the banking app and stared at the balance on the shared family fund, 0.0 hours. The same account we'd all contributed to Mom, Dad, and me for emergencies, shared care Bryony's recovery. They took every cent, not a forwarding number, not even a postscript. My breath hitched shallow and tight. Alara stirred her tiny fingers curling near my collarbone. She was warm, trusting, and utterly unaware that 2 people she'd never remember had just made a decision that would shape her entire life. I pressed my lips to her forehead and whispered, "Thanks for the heads up." They hadn't even waited for the weekend to end. I was supposed to watch her while Bryony rested after her supposed breakdown in Berlin. No one said how long the arrangement was, or that it came with a disappearing act and financial sabotage. But then again, nothing with them ever came labeled clearly. I laid Alara gently into the portable bassinet, her breath steady, her cheeks still pink with sleep. Then I stood and walked to the kitchen where I kept the paper files, the ones Mom always mocked me for printing. I pulled out the last bank statement. It had shown over $18,000 2 weeks ago. I tried calling them, of course. Straight to voicemail. I texted Bryony. Read no reply. My chest ached, not from panic, but from something heavier, recognition. Of course they'd do this. Of course I was the one they'd leave holding the child, the debt, the silence. The fridge buzzed softly behind me as I leaned against the counter and looked around. Bottles, diapers, her pink sleep sack still warm in the laundry basket. Everything that belonged to someone else, now mine, by default. By morning, I'd begin sorting out Alara's schedule and look into legal guardianship. But for now, I just sat beside her and watched her sleep, the enormity of it all pressing against my ribs. Because deep down, I already knew they weren't coming back. Not for her, and not for me. The thing is, I shouldn't have been surprised. Being the reliable one starts so quietly, you don't even notice the leash forming. It's picking up Bryony from ballet because Mom is on a deadline even though I had a club meeting. It's folding Dad's shirts because Bryony gets distracted and then watching her distraction turn into reward. I used to think I was being helpful. That being dependable made me valuable. But dependable turned into invisible. Bryony was all fire and drama tears in parking lots, poems left on napkins, a dozen half-finished majors before she settled on spiritual anthropology. People adored her because she was messy and luminous and impossible to hold accountable. My parents loved her like she was rare crystal even when she shattered everything in sight. Me, I was the shelf. They called the family fund a shared net. Contributions from Mom's side, hustle Dad's lecture, stipends, my freelance gigs. It started after Bryony's second hospital stay, just in case someone else needed support. I remember that exact phrasing, someone else. Not Bryony, not again. Someone else. But I was never someone else. I was the backup system. The first time Bryony drained the account, it was for a retreat in the Catskills. Transformative, she called it. The second time, it was a failed move to Los Angeles to write a memoir she never started. They told me I shouldn't be so rigid about money, that Bryony was trying to become. Meanwhile, I patched gaps in my car insurance and skipped new glasses for 2 years. Now here we were. They'd left me with her daughter, emptied the account, and moved to Barcelona like it was an overdue sabbatical. The silence after that text wasn't just cruelty, it was clarity. They'd never intended to come back. Not to help. Not to answer. Not even to check. I sat on the couch, the room dim around me, Alara softly cooing in her sleep. I remembered the last time my mother had visited this apartment. She'd frowned at my chipped mug and said, "You still don't have matching dishes." She didn't comment on the handmade tiles I'd installed in the bathroom or the framed photos I'd restored for the Historical Society. Just the dishes. Of course she left without saying goodbye. That's who she always was. That's who they all were. I was the quiet daughter, the stable one. and stable people don't need warning, but Alara would. She would need more than they ever gave, and I was the only one left to figure out how to give it. By day 4, my body had learned to function in 2-hour fragments. Ilara's sleep patterns were an unpredictable math problem. 3 naps of 40 minutes, or 1 long cry from 2 to 4 in the morning. Her lungs were impressive. My nerves were sanded down. I worked in flashes editing footnotes for a regional history journal while she napped on a folded towel beside my laptop. The client had emailed twice about the deadline. I lied and said the delay was due to a family emergency, which felt absurdly mild. Every bottle was a negotiation. Every diaper a scramble. I bounced her until my arms ached, then rocked her with podcasts in my earbuds just to stay awake. There were moments, short ones, where she'd smile at me, gums showing, and it felt like oxygen. Then she'd scream again, and I'd feel like I was vanishing into the wallpaper. Friends sent check-ins, texts, a meme here or there. Nobody showed up. I called Bryony twice, left 1 voicemail. I even typed out a 3rd message asking her point blank when she was coming back. I didn't send it. What was the point? On Thursday morning, after a night of pacing the floor with Alara strapped to my chest while she screamed into my collarbone, I opened the door to get the mail and found a small Tupperware on the stoop. Still warm. A note written in tiny cursive, "You're doing more than enough." I looked across the hall. Mrs. Arliss's curtains twitched just slightly. She was retired, lived alone, read mystery novels with the windows open. We'd only spoken once before about trash pickup. Later that afternoon, she knocked once lightly and handed me a folded quilt. "I made it for the wrong-sized bed," she said, voice, even as if this were a business transaction. I thanked her. She didn't ask to come in. She didn't stay. It was the first time someone saw me in days. That night, I sat in the glow of the kitchen light holding Alara with one hand and spooning reheated stew with the other. My arms were tired, my chest heavier than hunger could explain. But for the first time all week, I didn't feel entirely alone. The next morning, I went looking for the old folder where my parents kept legal documents. I hadn't set foot in my parents' house since the day they left. It still smelled like lemon wood polish and overconfidence. I told myself I was just there to grab the last container of baby formula, or maybe find an old bassinet tucked in the attic, but I knew what I was really looking for. Answers. Or proof. Ilara dozed in the carrier strapped to my chest as I moved through the kitchen opening drawers with slow fingers. The fridge was empty except for a jar of imported fig jam and half a bottle of Prosecco. The cabinets were clean, too sterile in that way. Only people who don't plan to return leave them. In the bottom drawer beneath the junk mail pile and broken corkscrew, I found a worn green folder labeled Spain. Inside were printed travel itineraries going back 6 months. Flights, apartment lease, and Barcelona international SIM cards already activated. It wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't emotional. It was orchestrated. Behind the itineraries was a notarized form. My name, my address. My signature copied from an old lease, I realized. Power of attorney for Alara Quinn, age 6 months, transferred to me indefinitely. I pressed my thumb to the paper, trying to understand the depth of it. They had made me her legal guardian without ever asking, without a conversation, without even pretending I had a choice. Tucked into the back of the folder was a printed bank statement. The family account dated 2 weeks before they vanished. A withdrawal, $21,600. Destination, Meridian Trust, Private International Division. Not even a U.S. bank. They moved the money offshore. I sat at their kitchen table, the same table where they'd once hosted faculty dinners, and corrected my posture and stared at the numbers. I should have been furious. I should have wanted to break something, but all I felt was stillness. This wasn't a mistake. It was a trade. They chose freedom, and they offered me Alara as the excuse. A pan on the counter still had the price tag from a boutique in Portland, $240. They'd left that behind, too. I folded the documents and placed them in my bag. Then I looked around the room one more time, as if expecting to find their voices echoing off the walls. But it was quiet, and the quiet didn't apologize. Back home, I laid Alara down, opened my laptop, and searched how to file for emergency guardianship in Virginia. I expected the legal aid office to be sterile and overworked. In some ways, it was. The waiting area buzzed with fluorescent lights, and the receptionist barely looked up from her keyboard. But when Ephraim Rhodes stepped into the room, tie slightly crooked sleeves rolled, he greeted me like I was a person, not a case file. That alone nearly broke me. I showed him the documents I'd found, the power of attorney, the bank statement, the printed itineraries. He read through them slowly, tapping the pages once before he spoke. "They didn't notify you?" he asked. "No, they just left." He nodded, jaw tight. "Then this isn't just a guardianship transfer. It's potential financial abandonment, maybe even fraud depending on how the funds were classified." He explained that while the power of attorney was technically legal, the deception around it wasn't. If we could show they intended to offload responsibility without consent or knowingly misused shared funds, we had ground to challenge both the custody arrangement and the money trail. I asked what the process looked like. He said it would be slow, tedious uphill. I said I'd already been up all night for weeks. What's one more climb? That afternoon, I began cataloging everything: receipts, screenshots, Bryony's old texts asking me to help out for the weekend, and my mom's message about the money. I compiled a spreadsheet. I printed copies and labeled them. It felt obsessive, but also like I was building something one page at a time. 2 days later, Bryony finally called. I almost didn't answer, but I wanted her voice on the record. "Danica," she said, her tone clipped. "You agreed to this." "No, I didn't. You said you'd help. For a weekend. Not indefinitely." There was silence on the line, and then a laugh, dry, condescending. "You always dramatize everything." I hit record on my second phone. "You think they abandoned you? Grow up. They're done carrying you." I nearly dropped the phone. I steadied my voice. "They weren't carrying me. They were hiding behind me." "You're being ridiculous," she snapped. "It's done. You're not going to scare us with legal threats." I didn't say anything. I let the quiet fill the space. She hung up. I labeled the recording and backed it up twice. That night, Alara had a mild fever. I held her against my chest, her breath hot and uneven, and watched the ceiling pulse with the streetlight outside. I didn't feel strong. I didn't feel vindicated. But I wasn't afraid of them anymore. The next morning, I called Ephraim and told him I had something he needed to hear. The message came on a Sunday morning, just as I was warming a bottle. "We're flying back. We want to see Alara." No apology, no explanation. Just a declaration like they were returning to claim a suitcase they'd forgotten. I didn't reply. 3 days later, they showed up at my door, Sandra in her expensive scarf Talbot with sunglasses perched on his head like a crown. They looked tan and rested the kind of rested only people without responsibilities ever managed to be. I opened the door just wide enough to let their intentions hit the threshold and stop there. "You look tired," Sandra said, brushing past me. "Still working that part-time job?" Talbot followed, arms crossed, eyes already scanning the apartment. "We were surprised you didn't reach out sooner. Thought you'd have questions. But I guess not everyone's cut out for parenting." I didn't answer. I let them talk. Sandra walked to Alara, who was seated in her high chair, gumming a piece of banana. She clicked her tongue disapprovingly. Her posture's off. "You really should be doing tummy time more consistently." I turned to face them fully. I filed for full custody 3 weeks ago. They froze. And I submitted documentation of the bank transfers, the forged power of attorney, and your failure to notify me of intent to leave the country. I also have recorded calls with Bryony confirming I never agreed to long-term guardianship. Talbot's jaw shifted. "Danica, there's no need to escalate." Sandra took a step forward. "Let's not make this ugly." "It's already ugly," I said. I just stopped pretending it wasn't. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Sandra's expression hardened, her eyes sharp with the kind of cold calculation I'd grown up watching. Talbot sighed, performing disappointment like it was a rehearsed monologue. "I think it's best we leave," he muttered. I nodded and opened the door. Sandra turned back as she walked out. "You've always had a flair for melodrama. I just didn't think you'd drag a baby into it." I didn't respond. I didn't flinch. I closed the door gently, turned the lock, and exhaled. Ilara dropped her banana on the floor and clapped her hands. That afternoon, Ephraim called to confirm our court date had been moved up. The courtroom smelled like dust and wood polish, and everything felt too bright. Ephraim walked with quiet certainty, holding our binder like it was gospel. I sat beside him, hands folded, watching the judge's eyes more than my parents'. Sandra and Talbot arrived 10 minutes late. Bryony never showed. Ephraim began with the timeline. He presented the notarized documents, the travel plans dated months in advance, the account statements showing the funds drained and transferred offshore. Then he brought out the recordings, Bryony's voice dismissive and cold, confirming I had never agreed to guardianship. He handed the judge a printed transcript. Sandra cleared her throat a few times. Talbot smirked now and then. They didn't deny the evidence. They tried to reframe it. My daughter is prone to exaggeration, Sandra said smoothly. She's under a lot of stress. Caring for a child, especially one that isn't hers, is bound to bring up emotion. The judge didn't blink. I've reviewed the documentation, she said, her voice level. What concerns me is not just the abandonment, but the strategic nature of the transfer. Ms. Quinn was misled and left without support, both financially and emotionally. She paused, looked directly at my parents. I'm granting full legal custody to Ms. Quinn. The offshore account will be frozen pending review. Any visitation from Sandra or Talbot Quinn must be supervised and approved in advance. Sandra opened her mouth. The judge raised a hand. We're done here. Outside, the wind had picked up. Sandra stopped me by the courthouse steps. You were always jealous of Bryony, she said, voice low and sharp. Even as a child. You just waited for a way to punish us for loving her more. I looked at her but said nothing. She turned heels, clicking, Talbot following behind without a word. I walked to the parking lot where Ilara was waiting with Mrs. Arliss, who'd come without being asked. The baby giggled when she saw me, arms outstretched. That night, as I rocked her to sleep, I realized I hadn't felt relief. Just an odd, hollow stillness, like the end of a very long echo. The next morning, I opened my email and saw a message from Ephraim marked urgent. The kiln hums quietly now, steady and warm. I keep it running low most mornings while Ilara plays on the quilted mat a few feet away. The cradle I built from old pine slats sits near the shelf of finished bowls. She naps there sometimes, fingers curled around a fabric doll Mrs. Arliss stitched by hand. My hands are back in clay. The wheel spins again. I open the studio 2 days a week, 3 when Ilara's feeling settled. Orders are slow but steady. The local cafe restocked their mug shelf with my pieces last month, and a college student wants a custom set for her thesis exhibit. I take what I can, and I let the rest go. Mrs. Arliss comes by every Friday with oatmeal cookies wrapped in wax paper. She never stays long, just a check-in and a soft squeeze of my arm before she disappears down the sidewalk. Her presence is its own kind of healing quiet, dependable, the opposite of what I was raised to expect from adults. Sometimes I still wake up expecting a new message, some fresh twist in the saga, but it's been months and the silence has settled into something I can live with. The legal follow-ups are mostly done. The account is still frozen. There's no word from Bryony. I've stopped waiting. Last week, Ilara took her first steps between the work table and the door. She fell after the third one, then laughed like it was a game. I laughed too, and then cried alone in the kitchen after she went to sleep, not because I was sad, but because I was the one who saw it. I wrote Bryony a letter yesterday, not out of obligation, just to close a loop. I didn't say much. Ilara is safe, I wrote. That's all that matters. I didn't include a return address. This morning, as I opened the studio and set my fingers into the damp clay, I looked at the small cradle beside me, the tiny bowl Ilara had dented with her thumbprint, the faint streaks of flour on the floor from yesterday's toddler baking attempt. I was left behind so they could escape. But I stayed and built something better.